on menti.com. So you can go to MENTI, menti.com. It'll be up in a minute. And this will prompt you to enter a code, which will ask you some key questions. This is our first question for our first panel. What should be the priority for the EU in the field of cybersecurity for the years to come? More cooperation between member states. A spoiler, that's my vote there when we were testing it out, so there's one vote there. Supporting the EU cybersecurity industry, fighting cybercrime more effectively, and raising awareness and developing skills. So,
Can I ask a question before we go on? Apart from using it, so you only take questions from the floor in the old-fashioned way.
yes.
I've had my team monitor what's been going on. They've broken into a number of the issues that we've been talking about. So I prefer that we have a debate.
Yeah, we will have a debate. I am going to come to that. There will be microphones for you in the audience. You should notice this is being web streamed. You in the audience will not be shown on the webcam, but we will be able to hear your questions, so we will, of course, come to that. You can also use by Twitter. You can follow me. I'm Brussels Geek, tech policy journalist based in Brussels, and ask the questions of me, or, of course, ask questions using the hashtag for our event, which is, of course, DA17EU. And if you tag it cybersecurity or tag it IoT, those questions will filter through to us. But now I'm going to turn to our very first panel, addressing the present and future cybersecurity challenges. And right next to me, we have from the European Parliament, Mia-Petra Kumpala-Natri, who is from Finland. Then we have Sebastiano Tofaletti, who is representing the European Digital SME Alliance and giving us the view from small business. Then we have Jaya Balu, who is from KPN in the Netherlands. And finally, on the far end, our cybersecurity expert, Andrea Barisiani from F-Secure. Let me start with you then from the far end. Give us a sort of an overview of how you see the current ecosystem.
The current cybersecurity ecosystem.
Yes.
It's booming, and business is good for pretty much everyone, both on the defensive sides, but unfortunately on the offensive side as well. This is a traditional market where it was very hard to justify investment in, because when we started doing consulting 10 years ago, it was really difficult to convince customers that they should pay to protect against something which hasn't happened yet and that there's also no history for. And we see that in the past 2-3 years, this ecosystem is changing dramatically. We see newscasts just broadcasting stories about deep cybersecurity issues, which anybody now can comprehend and relate to. I like to say, 10 years ago, my parents, they had no clue about what I was doing. I was explaining to them I'm a ethical hacker. I do hack things for a living, and of course they would be really scared because hacking is such a bad word. And I would try to explain to them that we hack for good, that we're involved into this creative and constructive process of defending things. Nowadays, they immediately perceive what's at stake and what everything is about. Especially now that these cybersecurity threats are also moving to targets which go beyond, these obscure internet infrastructure that we're using, but they can target anything from cars to planes to your home appliances to your fridge and IoT and so on, as we know about it. So it's a good thing that there's a lot of perception for the issues, but this is a side effect of the fact that cybersecurity concerns are increasingly affecting our lives. And this is why we have efforts or panels such as this one to understand how to react and not to be behind the curve when it comes to defending pretty much our lives.
Okay. Yeah, Petra, then let me ask you, how do you take on board what's being said here and apply policy to it?
Yes, thank you. I think it's very right what was said here, that all the people know that we are getting more and more dependent on the digital services, and at the same time we start feeling also that we get more vulnerable. So we need to seek answers also together. It is happening on the state level, and what's like the old-fashioned way that the state buys each other and whatever happens there upper level. which has been known by the movies and by the stories and real facts. Not everything is known by the citizens, but we kind of can guess what has happened and is happening. But now it's coming also for everyday living, our own internet connections, our own connected life and dependency on the digital solutions. So we see that the need is there as well. And then it comes for the question that how can we secure our privacy? So if we keep in mind that we do have, as Western countries, some values and some principles for data privacy, for some rules how to act in between, or when you send a mail, you don't open the envelope and read it, and then there is a privacy. And I think the challenge for the politicians is that we should keep that same online that we have in offline world, and then that creates kind of basics where we should target to. So there are two levels. Yes, the very high level, how to effect votings or the manipulating the knowledge we do have, but then at the very same time our own personal one-to-one messaging, and then your own data, where it is kept and how. All this is challenging, and I very much believe that there is no single country in EU who can manage this alone, not even the biggest one, not to talk about the small country. We are now in Malta, I come from the Finland, not much bigger, but that is bigger in Malta, but still small. So I think there is a very good way for the European Union to act together, and when acting together really create more capacities also, as described before, to protect us from that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned privacy, and of course it's easy to think of Internet of Things as simply machines talking to machines and leaving the human element out of it. I mean, I was noticing people are already sending messages in on Twitter that by 2018, 2 million employees will be required to wear health tracking devices. And of course that all forms part of this massive network. Are small businesses equipped to deal with these huge issues?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very tough one. Obviously, nowadays, many small businesses are the weak point, the weak chain in the value chain. Because attacking a small business, sometimes it's easier than a bigger company, and if they are in a supply chain, possibly all the supply chain is at risk itself. So obviously there is a lot to do in that respect. Now, what can we do to improve the solution? There are different ideas that we are discussing, at least our organization is discussing at European level. We think one first and fundamental topic is awareness and competencies, skills. We need to change the mindset, we need to change the culture. I mean, people have been speaking about the certification scheme, for instance. We do not necessarily think that the new rubber stamp will solve the problem. We think we need a real cultural change, because you and we install a IT security software on our computer, and then we are sure, okay, now I have done what I had to do. Now I will not change my password regularly, I will not select a secure password, and so on and so forth. So sometimes if you just give people, the label, the rubber stamp, then they think, okay, I'm safe. I locked my home, and then I don't need to do anything else. Whereas we need a cultural change, okay? So we need people to start thinking really what they have to do to make sure that cybersecurity is in place, and then they will automatically more or less automatically select the right tools to make that happen.
Okay, well that sort of leads on very nicely. Tell me a bit whether you believe it's a cultural change or a technological change, or do we have the tools already at hand?
Actually, I don't think it's like one of any of these things. I mean, we're talking about a different set of stuff. We've actually made it remarkably difficult for ourselves. And specifically in Europe, we have a lot of different countries where we try to get some form of consensus with how we actually have policy measures going forward. And one of my pet peeves is the NIS directive. So where we've actually asked, and I think for small businesses this is especially compelling, because we've asked every single sector to do something with the NIS directive, telecom, healthcare, transport, you name it, we've asked them. But we don't require the same amount of action on the part of hardware and software vendors. And this irritates me endlessly. I could talk about that point only forever. And and that's just the policy side. When it comes to certification, what you tend to see is that there are parties who are in favor of it because they also see it as a money-making machine rather than something that will actually help us. And I think the excuse like user awareness, that's a nonsense excuse. We need to build better products, and users should not have to do it themselves. And really, so it's a technologically challenging issue in the face of what I think is the evolving and dynamic political landscape. We hold signals intelligence and traffic collection for law enforcement and the ability to hack back and collect 0 days. We hold that higher information assurance. I disagree with this approach. We put ourselves at risk when we talk about weakening encryption or abolishing it altogether if it cannot be penetrated by law enforcement agencies. And whereas I would like to have similar policies in the digital world as we have in real life, when it comes to opening up a letter, it's not that easy. And I think the path to evil is to try to have some sort of management of encryption keys or golden key management. I don't think it will work. So we actually need new tactics for the digital world, which will not be the same as what we have in real life.
If I can add to this, there were 2 points which were spot on. In fact, in my notes in my bag, when I had the directive commented, and there's this section where all the areas of applications are indicated, such as water infrastructure or electric infrastructure and so on. But you're quite right. Vendors of commercial products should be absolutely part of it. Also because we need to think about what is a critical infrastructure. I would argue that, yes, a telecom provider back-end infrastructure, their routers, their cellular towers, of course they're critical infrastructure, but also everything that's connected to the DSL lines of the customers, it should be considered like that. The routers that they buy, that they plug into their home, so the end of the DSL line, which is deployed to all customers, is part of a critical infrastructure. All of your phones, which are always constantly connected on public-facing networks, are part of critical infrastructure. So there's a tendency to have policy making and directives that only control the traditional sense of critical infrastructures. But now, even cars, which are connected, should be considered part of it. So I think we need to accept the fact that these definitions should expand to pretty much everything that is connected, and not only the classical or exotic, so to say, definitions of what we consider a security critical target. So I think it's really important.
Mia Petra, this debate over what was critical infrastructure was something you must have heard dozens and dozens and dozens of times in putting together the NIS directive. This was one of the core sticking points, was it not?
I was not the one negotiating NIS, but then still in the trilogues, some ambitious part of the parliament was watered down by the national countries, the member states, as there were 28 opinions of the national security, and they wanted not to give up. So my statement here would be that we really, European cooperation is based on trust. And then if we do not trust each other, we are really vulnerable and scattered, because I started by saying that I don't believe that in this internal market one country alone could do. If Europe alone altogether is enough, we should have also the worldwide markets for the secure things. So I very much like to think of this IoT now, after having good talks with some specialists on the issues, that we should really talk about IoIT and IoST. So Internet of Insecure Things or Internet of Secure Things. And I would really much to see this IoST, the Internet of Secure Things, a lot. So I'm really thinking that it's not only the question of small or big companies, as SME is represented here, but it's the old-fashioned companies that do the remote access the equipments without no thinking. Is there always even PIN code to look at by the consumer? So if everything is connected in the Internet of Things, should we somehow have an idea that the one I'm buying, is it maybe a few euros more expensive, but then at least more secure? And then as internet is for us all, we should be more cautious of the together of the responsibilities that what we add there. I was thinking, I'm an engineer, but very long time ago, before entering to the politics, it was like everybody was thinking if your software and your computer was secure or not, and if not, it was few minutes and hours, and then you get something wrong. And now, if I buy some connected devices, I do not even think is it protected and how, and it's still using our common internet. So I think there is a lot. It should be easier for consumers to think, and then also so for the providers to add there, because if internet is now changing the internet of everything, internet of things, we should consider the things are also secured and somewhat, and what is better. It's not perfect, of course, using it creates a lot of things, but at least to have some basic marks. So could it be like CE mark for connected products or something we could develop in Europe?
As you were talking about Internet of Things, which is obviously a great source of insecurity, because there are millions of devices which could then trigger a major cyber attack. There's an idea that we are thinking about, and I just perhaps wanted also to hear the views from the experts on the panel, because first of all, Europe has built a very worldwide recognized standard on Internet of Things, which is the 1M2M, which has been developed by Europe together with other partners in the world. That's very good. But then we have seen other regions in the world which have countries like, I'm thinking about South Korea or Taiwan, for instance, which have invested in platforms that implement on open source the IoT standard to make sure that the producers of devices can plug them into a platform which is running on open source, which is good, of course, for the SMEs and for all the producers, etc. But we think it is also good for security, because when you run on open source, it's much easier for the public, for all the people who use it to just check, because there is plenty of programmers around who can see the code and see if there is anything happening, if somebody is trying to attack it. Whereas when you use proprietary systems, and there are many, we, especially in Europe, rely a lot on IoT private proprietary platforms. I don't want to name them, but you know what I'm talking about. And they are certainly secure. I don't say they are not secure, but it's maybe easier to attack them because there's only one company that can check whether they have been attacked or not. Right? Yeah. So what do you think about this sort of debate between open source and proprietary? Is it something that can help us ensure better security?
So I love your comment, because actually I actually don't agree. Yay! So the reason I don't agree is because I think there's a huge fallacy in assuming that if it's open source, it must be good, because we're all looking at it. And I want to point an example to Heartbleed. I don't know how many of you remember the Heartbleed incident. It was about 2 years ago. And what we had a piece of open source called OpenSSL, which allowed you to make connections. You might remember the logo still. It was literally of a bleeding heart. It was a sort of branded vulnerability. And what we saw is we had Heartbleed, and vendors didn't even know when they were using this open source library in their products. And we're talking about big vendors, globally, internationally known American vendors, who did not know that it was even there. So I think actually there's no security and obscurity in assuming that proprietary code is less secure than open source. It really depends on whether or not it's actually being validated and verified. And sometimes proprietary code could be better validated because there's a stronger corporate responsibility behind it. But I think what we need to really solve this problem, which we don't have anywhere, is a bill of materials. Whether you have an open source product or a closed source product, you're always using some sort of integrated library framework in your code. What I'd like to know is, what are the open source components that we use to build a thing? And there is no real standard in IoT, because I think the assumption is we take a dumb device, we dump some variant of Linux on it, we put it out there, we think, someone's going to change it in about 4 years, and we connect it to everything else, and we think by connecting a dumb device to everything else, we've suddenly called it smart. That's where we get to smart grids, smart homes, smart offices. And I think that's also another huge misrepresentation of the truth. It doesn't become smart, it just becomes more vulnerable.
So I am the founder of an effort which is called the Open Source Computer Emergency Response Team. I've been writing open source software for 15 years. I develop an open source and open hardware product, so I'm really into this open source community. But unfortunately, I also disagree. In all of the penetration testing that we do and source code auditing, we always find that there's no qualitative difference between using open source software or not in a product. As it was correctly said, it's all about the process, and it really depends. You can approach and integrate open source software in a product in a very respectful and coherent and way which constantly takes advantage of the fact that the software is open source and provide continuous update. Or you can just use open source software to save yourself some time, drop it into a product, and then forget about it for years. And sometimes that dependency, being that is not written by, let's say, developers that are also handling the proprietary code, can make it more difficult to them to actually patch and adapt that software in future evolutions in case there's not a strong, let's say there are not strong technical skills for adapting to code that wasn't written by your own. So it's a double-edged sword. And this is to say that it is incorrect to say that open source software is more secure, but it's also incorrect to say that open source software is less secure, and the other way around. It really highly depends. And I think it all relies on trust. This was a point that was raised before. As auditors, we're often faced a situation where our own customers, they want us to do the so-called black box testing, where they don't want to give us any piece of information about the target that we're testing. This is a very common situation, and it's always the most difficult situation because let's say there's budget for 2 weeks of testing. If I do a black box testing, I will of course find critical issues, but I will only find a subset of the issues that are found. And I will also not be able to reason why the issues were created in the first place, and it will be more difficult to me to advise on what are the right processes to solve them. If I do get the code, whether it's open source or not, I will find all of the issues that are there, even some that might not have an impact now on a product or a software, but that could become a security issue in the future because maybe someone changes a configuration of a line of code. And so even when we are engaged into do security auditing, which you would think there's an implicit level of trust, there's a lot of paranoia into giving out this kind of information. And the same goes in advertising if your product contains open source software and so on. And I think there should be more transparency, and vendors should understand that giving out information about your code or part of the code for security purposes is not an automatic compromise of your intellectual property of the product and is not a commercial risk. On the other hand, it is a commercial risk if your software or hardware product will have a critical security vulnerability which will be exploited massively. And I would just like to add a second thing. There was a mention of maybe that secure products are more expensive. I disagree. I don't think this should be the case. I think if security is integrated into a product from the design and also into its implementation, it doesn't necessarily mean that it should be more expensive, or anyway, users shouldn't have to pay more to get something that is more secure or even be aware of what's going on. If I buy a smart washing machine, there is an expectation for me that I shouldn't get compromised because of it. And the vendors should be liable in case there's gross negligence in omitting security features that nowadays we know it should be common. So I know it is very difficult to do policy making on implementations, but I think at least in terms of design of something, there are a set of standard best practices that I think everyone that develops connected devices should adopt. And this doesn't mean telling them what to do, but at least it means to obey to a certain set of standards, which we have and had from a technological perspective for 10 years. When we look at security research, we look at the future. We look at protecting against threats that are not current. But if we want to have state-of-the-art security on a connected product, we have all the knowledge for doing that. So it's not a matter of investing a lot or researching a lot. We're talking about techniques that we know exactly what they are.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. And we'll come back to a lot of the points. But one of the issues you raised was trust. So I'm going to ask our audience and those watching online again to vote in our second question, which sort of gets to the heart a little bit of trust. And if we could have it up there, please, the slide. Okay. This is also still on your menti.com app. Right. So do you think that certification is an appropriate tool to increase EU cyber resilience? This is a very straight yes or no question, and we haven't. Oh, okay. Yep. Great. We will come back to that at the end, but I would like you all to think about it as you're listening to our speakers, because it gets to the heart of trust. Yeah, Petra, you were going to respond to something.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Question, because we
I just want to answer quickly.
You're not on
so.
camera. We will come to.
why? Because
No, sorry. I will ask you to be quiet, please, and let.
it's a broader.
You're not
Yes.
on the panel, sir. Please let the panel speak.
Yes,
I will
then
come to you. Thank you.
I was responding that if it's not more expensive, that's very good news. But then my worry is, and if it's very good news that we can say that all the techniques are there. But then I still see the difference that the IT people talking, and then the traditional manufacturers, the toasters, and then they said it's connected, or the doorbell factories, and then it's connected, or your boiler in the house and it's connected. Do they always have that technology and awareness in the SMEs or in the bigger companies, and also who's importing to the EU? And that's why we really talk about these standardizations and some rules to be put in a place.
Most of the times, yes, they don't have this expertise. However, they should have the means to evaluate if the, let's say, digital components that they're integrating into their very analog toaster is secure or not. And I guess this is why either standards are important, or to have processes where they can ask a third party to understand if this integration is secure or not. We always have this very typical setup where, let's say we have a car maker that needs to integrate a very complex, let's say, digital and connected component onto a vehicle, and they treat it as this aftermarket component that even if they're going to sell as part of their vehicle, they always have. It's typical for them to have an internal team that does basic security testing, and also to complement that with third-party security testing. And even if let's say, toaster company, to simplify the terms, doesn't have an internal security team for that, they can always reach out and either hire a third-party company to do this test, or also to demand the vendor itself to provide proof that they have gone through this process without paying anything more. I think it's very reasonable. If I would be a toaster manufacturer and I would ask a company, please provide me the, let's say, penetration test, security audit assessments from a third party, a trusted third party, that your product is secure. And I would just select the vendor that satisfies this request. And I think it is my responsibility to do so if I understand the risk. If I don't understand the risk, then of course I will ignore all of this, But it's like if I put an alarm system on my door, even if I don't know anything about alarm systems, I need to pose myself these questions. And I don't think, I think it's a reasonable question to have, which doesn't necessarily require a lot of technical skills.
So we do have this security by design concept to promote, and that was really what we often put in the political texts.
Yes, however, one must be careful in understanding that a secure design doesn't necessarily imply a secure product on all kind of threats. It implies that a certain class of attacks probably are mitigated at the very beginning. And security by design also means that there's a process for updating and managing vulnerabilities in a product once they arise. No product will ever be 100% secure. And even if it's 100% secure at a certain point of time, that security is going to be challenged, in the months coming forward. And sometimes it is more important to be aware of when a product is compromised and to handle that compromise efficiently. And if features are not designed into the product to allow you to handle these kind of incidents when they occur, then it becomes much more difficult. The example could be if I have 100,000 toasters on the internet and they get compromised, and I don't have a reliable and secure channel to update them when it's required, and I need to ask all of my customers to return them back for, updating them, that's a very costly mistake to make.
I'll ask you another question then, because based on what you said it very nicely, but ultimately, the bottom line of what you said about the issue of certification and third-party assessment, the bottom line, although I follow what you say, but the bottom line is probably, if I understand well, that a product is not secure if it's not certified by a third party, which is, a concept that I am not sure I would agree with, because, again, I have the feeling that type of argument goes into, okay, I got the rubber stamp, so I think I'm safe, I forget about it. If you talk about third-party assessment, because the third-party assessment is going to be made by expert people who are going to tell you where your vulnerabilities are, what you should do, what procedures, what processes you should change, etc. This is a different story. This is really how to improve the mentality, the way of working, etc. But we have to be a little bit cautious on just saying, yeah, we give another certification, and this is going to be a big business for the certification organizations and for the auditors. Fine. And then we are all safe, we are all secure. I personally not convinced.
I didn't use the word certification though, and I didn't mention about rubber stamps.
Sorry, when you talk about that's what I said, because when you talk about third-party assessment in certification industry, this means certification.
Right, but in our industry is entirely different. I don't make certifications.
Okay.
I just make technical reports where they explain exactly where a product is flawed, why it is flawed, and how to solve those issues. And we often find, actually I would say 90% of the times, that if that product went through any known industry standard certification for security, it actually has no impact on the outcome, because the way the certification is phrased and applied, it is so much detached from the technical reality of the way it should be that it's really relevant. Sometimes it is just a burden for developers to obey to the certification. So in automotive, you have a lot of certifications concerning the development of the secure code, and certain certifications, they allow for exceptions, and they actually don't solve most of the classes of bugs that we do find. So what I meant was, so the example was that if I'm the vendor of a toaster and I don't know nothing about IoT, and I want to integrate into my product some digital components, I need to be aware of the risks, and I need not to implicitly trust the vendor based on their own word, especially when they don't communicate to me what they do in order to secure their products. And I think it is much better for them to provide a technical assessment by a third party rather than tell me, okay, I have this certification stamp. So I actually agree with you 100%. And this is why into the technical cybersecurity industry, there's a classical distrust of certifications, especially because most of the problems, or I would say half of the problems, rely into incorrect implementation, which is something that certifications do not account for, and I don't think they can even do. But at least we could have standards where we ask vendors to allow for secure over-the-air upgrades and to, let's say, promote really basic things such as don't have a share key on 1 million devices that you disseminate, but have a public key infrastructure. And this is some practices which I think actually they can be formalized into policy making. But it just requires deep interaction between technical people and policymakers to make sure that these policies are really effective. Otherwise, it is just going to be a big detachment between the technical reality and what the policy stands for.
Sorry.
So I totally agree with that, but I think we need to recognize that, you know, we are distrustful because of spectacular failures that we've seen with certification. So that one of the biggest certification standards, for example, in the world that is actually taking place were things like PCI DSS. And the greatest data breaches we've ever seen were of companies who at that time were actually compliant with their certification. So it doesn't, having a certification doesn't actually pose any realistic expectation when it comes to the technical integrity of a product, and that's where we need to get to. In order to get there, I think I understand that we need to strike the right balance, and I think that was your concern about innovation and innovation costs, specifically for small industry, when having to do some sort of assessment to how good their products are. But I think the idea is this. You have a standard, and actually I'm not aware of any single IoT standard because there isn't one, because it depends on which communications medium they're over, but you know, you have a standard and that's nice, but the devil's in the details of implementation. The way that I look at it from the telecom sector, as the largest incumbent telco in the Netherlands, is we have our own ethical hacking team. But there's only a certain amount of navel staring that will give you any intelligence about how good you are. You need some sort of reality check, and I think that's what you were referring to. Andrea's idea is if you get a reality check for these critical products from another party, it allows you to improve beyond your own capability.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, and I do see a lot what you're saying. That there is an added value in providing a third-party assessment, a third-party report. That was the key word that I heard. Whereas we all have, you know, some issues with the idea that just a certification scheme per se, yet another one, because there are already many, is not going to solve the problem. But then I think, and I am happy that we agree on this, but then I think we have to be very clear and say to our policy masters, to the European Commissions and to our governments, that this is not the solution, because we know that people are working at full speed towards a new European scheme of certification. This is the subject of the panel of today. So I'm wondering what is your thinking about this, and you know.
Can I say something? It's not going to be popular, but I think actually certification is like a very good idea, like to kind of a priori determine what kind of requirements you need to have. But screw the certification part. Let's just say that we actually have a better evolving standard than anything we have now, because none of the ISO or whatever standards we have are evolving dynamically enough to appreciate the threat landscape in which we're sitting. And they're never detailed enough to actually determine how you should implement anything truly securely. It's too high level. It can be blanket, you know, discovering all this other stuff. So I think if we focus on, let's make sure we get it right, what we actually expect in terms of technical implementation, and we don't worry so much about certification, but we do focus on liability. And if we just ask for liability, just take responsibility if you screw up, I think that's enough, because it's not so much a worry of a toaster. Toasters are what, 20, 30 euros? I think the refrigerators, the larger investments, the things that we deploy at scale for critical infrastructure, those are my real concerns, because that we tend to do badly.
Maybe I can comment on this also, because another idea was floating in our discussions in Brussels was to propose a sort of label, a label based on a self-declaration by the vendors, by the manufacturers, where they, on a voluntary basis, take responsibility for a number of things in regard to cybersecurity. Is this more or less what you were thinking about, or is it something that will definitely not work from your point of view?
I'm a big anti-person against self-assessments, because we all have a tendency to be very nice to ourselves. I think I think if you assess anything, it has to be a third-party assessment. And I would prefer that we set up standards and say, if you don't follow this and you break your stuff and you cause damage, you're liable. So leave the stuff in between with certification and leave it out. Focus on what is it you expect, and then, you know, if they don't conform or if they don't act conform expectation, then you punish.
However, I would say that sometimes the right questions posed at a vendor can really unleash if they're doing something at all or not, and if they're doing it correctly. So we now see that on most websites you have these data retention, data privacy policy, which, you know, they legally have to publish, and sometimes they have to, most of the times, they have to explain to you how they handle your data. So I could imagine that if I could easily draft on one page a list of questions for, let's say, hardware or IoT makers that if they would have to reply to them, I could easily see who's doing a good job or not, or at least get an initial perception, right? It wouldn't be any guarantee, but it could be a good start.
But to follow through on that, you know, the GDPR, one of the reasons I think you're having such an enormously like accepted EU implementation is because of that threat of that 20% of your international revenues. That's what's driving the implementation. It's not like the best motivation to do better. It's this potential, you know, stick with a very clear expectation sets that you have to do a priori. So I think that's what's actually driving it. If we could do the same thing here, you might actually affect change.
But I absolutely agree there should be liability involved. If I'm a vendor of IoT devices and I'm grossly negligent into not implementing a technology at all or being extremely naive in doing so, I should be liable for that. There's no excuse in this year and age to make the class of mistakes that we see when we do the audits. And when we do audits, it's all fine because it means that hopefully we're into a design or development phase where we are asked to give our technical opinion before a product is unleashed on the market. But sometimes we get asked by, let's say, insurance companies, car makers, or just companies that want to use a product to assess these products that they want to buy, part of the procurement process, and we see mistakes which are embarrassing and could be really, really damaging. So liability must take a part into all of this. And one would think that the existing legal framework would already assign liability if somebody grossly negligent. But since sometimes the technical reasons for being negligent are really hard to comprehend to lawmakers, maybe some sort of standard or guidelines could help into that.
But can I just give you an idea about when we have a whole smart product line. We're a telco and we actually sell these services. The evolution of these services begins with like a sort of smart home or camera monitoring, and then we go to like the workspace and the grid kind of things where you get to comfort. You have lighting and etc. And then after you do those, the product evolution goes to smart health. And it's not about having something measuring your health. We're talking about pacemakers. They're sending their things to doctors. And we know, like, there is a famous security researcher, Mary Moo, who does a lot of lectures on the fact that she has a pacemaker in her that is vulnerable. And I think, when we talk about, I understand that it's difficult to explain to politicians why we should build this type of liability in, but then explain to them the gross negligence in building connected pacemakers. And I think you've got them.
Mia Petra, you're sitting scribbling, listening to all of this. How do you feel when it comes to this sort of question that you're basically making laws on one hand with a carrot and a stick? Because if you're honest actors, if you're good brokers, you will see, business case for security. But, I mean, the guys here are talking a lot about those dishonest actors or those bad actors. Mm-hmm. What sort of, legislative gaps do there still exist in terms of liability? Because we have lots of laws on that already.
And should it be too difficult if you can see that it was a criminal or it was not taking care of the security in the existing laws, like in the basic structure in the society? But then how to prove it? And is it a single person or is it something as a consumer law that you can do that all together? But it's really trying to simplify also the understanding. And I carefully listen all the time, but then I also see that the third-party evaluation or this, but I don't see that contradicting there's some kind of standardization or some kind of, in general, we have standards to be better interoperability in the European Union. So why not also on the security part, and despite of that, still continue evaluating and upgrading and updating the project. So I still didn't get a quite clear picture there, because for me, as I just think, not a politician, but the consumer, there normally is a good and bad products on the market, or can we really say that all the products are good as such? And this is like the starting point to improve the security of the digital fair we are entering into. And that's why I think that it's a lot of room to develop the idea, but I hear you're selling your stuff, but then it's not contradictory that at the same time you're selling your good services, a Finnish company, by the way. So then even very good one. So then it's still that there are other parts. So this whole digital ecosystem should improve the security. So that's one part of the secure things in the IoT, and then all the other infrastructure for the security. Am I right at all?
I'm not sure who you're asking, but look, can I give them very specific examples? There are devices that we've tested that have default credentials, and we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that weak credential and default on all devices. Then we're talking about insecure update mechanisms, so that anyone can potentially access these devices, if there is an update mechanism at all, because sometimes they just build a product with no update mechanism. And then when there is an update mechanism, it's not built securely. There are actual issues where, from a hardware perspective, you have things that are just improperly built. And when we see if you did want to build that chip better, what would be the cost? We're talking about a difference of 3 euro cents. So it is not a significant cost collateral that will affect your business case in order to build that security in from a hardware side. But it's the hardware side, it's the software side, it's the life cycle maintenance of a product that I'm talking about that maybe we haven't...
Could that be standardized as a standard by the EU laws also?
Yes,
That's what we are trying to
I think
go.
that's standardizing it and then saying if you do something that doesn't take into account these basic, because these are like really the basics, if it doesn't take into account these basic considerations and it results in some horrible nightmare-like scenario that we've seen in the past, that you will be held liable as a software and hardware vendor.
I mean, and that's also what I said. There are a set of design rules for developing secure products that I think can be easily put in 1 or 2 pages from a technical perspective. Then if we want to do a directive or a policy, probably takes a little more of legalese to formalize them. But it is, I think it's absolutely, it's an absolutely good idea. We should not have the illusion that creates 100% secure products, because look, when I speak here, I speak as a very security savvy customer of devices. I don't audit all the devices that I buy for my home, for instance, but I do know what kind of issues they could have. And I expect from these devices that I buy to have, a certain set of security standards, which I don't see implemented because I don't think certifications or standards that are available now are effective into conveying what actually needs to be done. So I think there needs to be more cooperation between the technical reality of people that are working into these things and know the security issues and the way policies are being driven. But I absolutely think that there's a middle ground where these two worlds can meet and can do something which is not a burden for companies, but it is actually an asset, because this is a problem. Most of the policies right now are a burden. And because of that, they're offloaded to people that are non-technical within a company, and that every time they have to interact with the developers or development process is like, oh, not again, and in the end, it doesn't result into secure products. So there is certainly room for improvement, and it's a problem that must be approached on every angle, whether it's a third-party technical assessment or policy making or standards. But it's important to understand how to harmonize all of these efforts.
And I want to just underline, you really hit the point that I really hope that we can create in Europe together, that security and secure devices, and with the help of some standardization, could be the competitive advantage for the European products and the whole ecosystem, but also some standards that we are creating here. So the trust could be then increased, and also the demand of these secure devices. So that's really the whole ecosystem question, and I in general think that Europe could deliver that one.
Okay, I'm seeing some people in the audience raising their hands. So let's go to you first. We have the microphones, and if you introduce yourself and then keep it quite brief.
Sure, I'll keep it very brief. My name is Mark Miller. I'm actually the chairman of one of the sub-working groups at the European Cybersecurity Organization, specifically addressing certification, standardization, and testing issues. I just wanted to mention that European Cybersecurity Organization is unique in that we have the public sector, we have governments, we have private sector, and we have the research community. So we're actually in this process within our working group of looking at all of the standards that exist, all of the certification approaches that exist, and we're looking at developing an actual meta framework around which we can see how could we come to a conclusion about, okay, maybe in certain vertical areas there will be standards and eventual certification, but it's not guaranteed that you have to have certification every time. There are possibilities for actually different levels of this. At the same time, I agree with the approach and the comment which was made by the panel, which says that certification isn't the be-all, do-all, end-all, because just because you get a certification doesn't mean that your final product is actually totally secure. My question for the panel would be, how can this be accomplished on a European-wide level from the situation now that we have each country having its own standards, each country having its own certification requirements, each country having its own testing protocols? I'd be interested to hear some ideas about this in addition to what is already going on within the European Cybersecurity Organization. Thank you.
That's a good question, because it is called the European approach, is the title of our panel, and we haven't really addressed the fragmented nature of Europe.
I can start and then I let the floor to the other panelists. I'm just glad that you made that comment because I myself, my organization, we are working very much together with the European Cybersecurity Organization. We are very glad that this is a CPPP, so a contractual private-public partnership that the Commission launched a year ago, more or less, where really, as you said, industry together with authorities, governments, and other stakeholders are working together with the purpose of really creating a better ecosystem of cybersecurity in Europe. So, and I think EXO is really working in the right direction. So from my point of view, that is the right place where the proposals may come for such schemes. But then definitely I think that, you know, as you said, it's not going to be just certification. It has to be a mix of things. I'm very glad what I heard earlier, that we need to provide, especially for the SMEs, like simple tools, reports, a list of questions that they have to think about when they design an IoT product. This is very valuable. And also, of course, you can get to the level of liability, of course, because that will trigger the right behavior from those who place products on the market. So that's just my first initial comment, but then I'm probably going to give the floor to, yeah, you have it.
We're sharing microphones. What I do think, though, is, you know, I'm triggered by your comment about how to have this EU-wide approach, because the one thing that I'm worried about, and also cross-sectoral, because one thing I'm worried about is that we don't actually always have the same threat and ideas of how we protect our infrastructure, and there are some countries that have very different privacy requirements than others, and that's probably why we have different approaches, because although we have some certain basic commonalities, there are some very big specificities. For example, in the last few days, you might have seen that there was a evolution of a malware like Black Energy that was attacking the power grids. And I wonder if we actually have a place where we can get to a very specific threat-oriented, risk-oriented approach for doing these types of common requirements across multiple geographies and sectors. And I don't know if that's necessarily possible. I think standard setting is possible, but having a common set of certification requirements that encompasses all of that is a totally different ballgame.
Well, let me just a little bit embellish on that question, is ask, how does Europe compare to the rest of the world? You know, because we can sit here and talk about what happens in Europe, but the nature of the Internet of Things is that it's not confined to our borders. Do you see differences?
Yes, I think there's a difference in effort. I think probably EU is a little more advantage into engaging into these discussions and trying to create a set of standards and policies, opposed to a lot of other countries. However, at the same time, I mean, there's been a case recently into US where there was a vendor of, I don't recall, I think it was webcams, which all got compromised and then were used as for launching other attacks, which kind of goes back to what is a critical infrastructure anyway. And I think they were held legally liable for the negligence into, well, there was an opinion on that.
Yeah, so it was part of Mirai actually. So what happened was, and this actually goes back to the Siemens devices for black energy. What's really interesting is, let's say that we have, I mean, a small medium enterprise or a company building these webcams, and then these webcams are compromised, and once compromised, we're responsible together with DIN DNS of launching one of the largest DDoSes we've ever seen, and the defense of the webcam manufacturer is, look, these cameras were never meant to be sold to consumers. The idea was that they were going to be part of a closed circuit system only for large enterprises to be used within a entire network topology of firewalls and IDSs, etc. So it's supposed to be completely protected from this type of attack. So it's not our fault. Don't look at us. Look at the people who incorrectly sold these devices to the wrong set of people. So I think this is the fundamental issue there. I don't think they actually were held to account because that was their defense.
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue that that's a very nice way of twisting completely the problem. I mean, it is, we can immediately perceive that was a very defensive answer, which really doesn't hold up. But my question would be, if we are in court, how easy would it be for, let's say, my or your technical argument to really set the record straight on that? And I think this is where we need to work on, right?
Because you asked how Europe positions itself compared to the rest of the world, especially the US, I would say. I'd also like to take that question in the angle of one of the topics that we had in the beginning, which was, how do we boost our European ecosystem for cybersecurity, okay? Because obviously we know that the cyber vendors, many of them, the strong ones at least, are sometimes outside the EU. But we also know that we have a very thriving industry. We have a lot of SMEs, we have a lot of startups, which are trying to disrupt the market with a lot of great innovations. And I think what we are doing now is something unique from my point of view, because what the Cybersecurity Organization, together with the Commission, so the public-private partnership, and governments, we are talking about an investment from the Age 2020 funds of 400 million until 2020, which is then going to be multiplied by 3 by the pledges of the industrial private sector. So we are going to talk about 1.2 billion euro investment for European cybersecurity. And this is about research, this is about new products, this is about industry, innovation, etc. And so I think here what we really want is Europe to become leader in this sector. And obviously it's a very hot sector, and we have the right companies. We just want to make sure that we become leaders in the world.
Okay.
Can I just come back to the question, because I think I derailed in my answer to the original question? If we also would compare a little bit what happens into the US, for instance, there's a specific class of products, which is hardware security modules, like smart cards, the smart cards that we use for credit cards, that they do have a process for being certified by the NIST. Kind of like all wireless device needs to go through the FCC, or at least we need a certification that the FCC needs to receive, where even if it's supported by self-declaration, it is going to be evaluated. And there is a process for the NIST where a list of questions are asked, and the vendor responds on what they're doing to submit to these basic criteria. This is optional, and it's now seen more of a commercial thing. Like if I do sell a smart card, I need to be NIST compliant, because otherwise nobody's going to buy my product. I could easily see, in being effective, something similar for IoT devices. To have this sort of registry where within EU, if I build an IoT device, I give all the information that the EU requires to evaluate if at least basic security principles are honored. And this comes into some sort of white box design testing. If I have all documentation for a product and maybe access to the code, it's not going to take me more than a few days to understand if basic outstanding mistakes are made, you know. And I think this is a process that can be done, and even if it sounds that it doesn't scale, I think it could scale in the same manner that the FCC into the US just needs to approve pretty much every wireless device that comes to market.
Just this comparison, and this is from the Vice President Ansip when he visited ITRE. He mentioned this program that we started, and now we have a 400 million European money, and then public partnership would target to 1.7 or whatever. 3 times more, so it's 1.6. Private money 1.2 plus European money, so 1.6 altogether. But then Commissioner Ansip reminded us that in US they have a program of $19 billion. So it's not that much to compare what we get, but it's better than nothing. And then to the question that are we seeing that member states could do it alone? And I don't believe, and Parliament tries to see that the possibility for the common approach, more harmonized way. NIS was one idea to get more harmonized answers, but like always in EU, it's step-by-step development. And I think there are ways. It's not just a technical issue, it's also the skills we have in Europe. I had a figure of 350,000 skilled people that we lack in the cybersecurity, specialized persons. This comes from the Frost and Sullivan report. So there is a lot to do together. The universities, we do have country by country, but they cooperate. Erasmus 30 years this year. So I think there are tiny things that we can improve the cyber resilience in European Union by acting together. And it's so much now we talk about the markets, but I still want to remind us that it's also that we do not have European cybersecurity if we do not have the credible cybersecurity industry in Europe as well. For me, I'm a normal citizen and not a specialist on the issue, but it's still quite worrying that we read about great news, and we should be cautious that we know that countries who do intelligence gathering, and at the same time we know that even the European Union member states often use industry from these countries to protect their systems. So why? Is it not they are not aware, or is that also one reason that we cannot trust all each other? So I think this is a sector we talk about a lot on the European defense, European security. I'm pretty sure that cybersecurity will be an essential part on that one as well, when it's now launched that new research and industrialization programs on the security side. So not to forget this modern kind of security that is very, very important to our democracy, to our non-vulnerable societies.
Okay, I'm going to take a question here.
My name is Jürgen Sturm. I work for a company located in Bavaria called Texas Instruments. I'm also a member of the steering board of the Alliance for Internet of Things Innovation, and as such very, very interested and also engaged what is happening there. I hear with a lot of sympathy that the panel tends to agree that liability is the interesting way to take a look at, and that brings me to one question. Are we maybe then at the moment misallocating resources, scarce resources, when we drive a program like a trust label? Because that at the end of the day may lack surveillance, but it may take resources away from what I take from the panel, maybe the more encouraging and the more successful way of looking at it in terms to develop liability schemes based on legal schemes which are existing already, which need to be adapted. More cross-border collaboration in the EU, which I think is crucial. It's a no-brainer, absolutely. And communication and enlightenment to users, not only to users, but along the value chain, including users. Because the value chain does not end at the point of sales. That's always once in a while our perception. No, it is a much more holistic approach. So my question to the panel would be, shouldn't we put more resources in that, as it appears to me, what I take from the discussion, to be the more successful way? And one thing I have to say, it has been just mentioned that the US are putting so much money in and Europe so little. Well, what hinders us from hooking up? Because cybersecurity is a global issue, and I think we would be very, very badly advised if we say there is a gap there and we do our own thing and we don't look what the US is doing. It's much more interesting and very important to collaborate on that. So it's about cybersecurity industry in Europe, not the European cybersecurity industry.
Do we agree with that?
I'm technical, and I can barely like listen to a problem without already coming up with a solution. So can I just suggest one now? What if? Okay, it's just a what if. What if we started with a initial standard, and then that we said, okay, you have a solution, so that complies with the standard. So your solution, by the way, has to have an index of the bill of materials of the components parts of your solution, and you will have to do this questionable or question-based assessment, not just tell me, but show me. And that would have to continue over the lifespan of your product. If you screw up at the very end, you also have a process of liability. But if we have this like fully fledged model, then having a sort of that rubber stamp moment is not as necessary as having all those other more important moments.
Well, you just described certification and testing. Sorry to say it, but you just described exactly what it's done. Set a standard, verify it, and then in the end say that's been verified, and that is it, and then there's a liability associated with it. So you actually described exactly the testing and standard approach.
However, in the way the question was posed, there was this implicit assumption that if we put a label, it ends there at the moment of sale. Because the question was, the question was if we, if we should focus away from just putting a label on a product.
Yeah.
To me, a label is just a side effect of something, and this something could mean many things. It could mean something useless that ends there, but it could also mean that there's, let's say, the intent of the vendor to maintain a continuous security process for the product. So, when we say label, we really need to understand what it actually means. I would like to see a label that shows me that the vendor went through what I know as a technical person to be the basic set of security standards, but also to maintain that same level of attention in the lifespan of a product. I want a label that if I buy a product with that label, I know that I'm going to get security updates for, 5, 10, 15 years. Ideally, I would like to have a label which tells me exactly for how long that product is going to be security supported, which is something that we only have on mobile phones. Only on mobile phones from Google and Apple, we do get to know exactly for how long security is going to be supported. There's no other class of devices that gives me that amount of information. There have been cases of smartwatches that went end of life 2 months after people would purchase them because maybe the company was acquired by someone else. And I think that's unacceptable. So when I think of your question, I think of label, I think we should focus on the label, but to make sure that the label doesn't end at sales and that it means all these set of nice and cozy technical things that we really know and that to us are really simple. I mean, I think we agree that it is not really that hard to make a product secure, but we have all of these overhead of certification standards which right now are not tuned into the technicalities of the way things are supposed to be.
Okay,
And
we're going to continue this conversation, but I know we're coming up to a break and people want their coffee. And I have got to allow the European Commission a say. Jakob, do you want to give your reaction to what you've heard? And we will take more questions in the second session, and we'll have a look again at the questions you've been answering as well. Yeah. So Jakob Bartinsky is head of the Cybersecurity and Digital Privacy Unit in DG Connect, for those of you who don't know him.
It's a great pleasure for me to listen to this debate. I mean, it's the timing is indeed perfect. We are really now in a listening mode, preparatory mode related to the review of the cybersecurity strategy, and some of the questions that, not some of the questions, the question you have raised are actually the question of vital interest to us. I wanted to pick up on a few things. First of all, on the fact that we haven't gone far enough with the NIS directive. I think we had this conversation, but I think it's a conversation worth having. And then I'm realizing that I think we are often, and for a good reason, reminded, with Latin maxim, primum nocere, which is normally used in medicine. First of all, you do not do harm. And obviously in the digital area, I think there are very good reasons why Commission has been consistently quite prudent and careful of not going too far. So NIS, if you believe that. It was conceived in 2012, so basically it was 5 years ago. Now, there is, luckily, we really hope for a positive indirect impact of the directive also on vendors, because basically you would have now a whole class of clients, of users of cybersecurity solutions, which would be vitally interested in being compliant, in having appropriate security measures, and that means, obviously, having IT solutions, having hardware from the right source, of right quality. So it is not a straight legal obligation on the vendors, but it will definitely be a big stimulus for the market, and big stimulus also for what has been a major point of discussion here, that is certification. Mark, I cannot agree with you more. What we are reflecting on is it's not this scheme, this solution, the answer, but it's basically of having a framework, and that is actually what we hear both from industry and member states, that allow to make something sensible, reasonable, that is EU-wide. So we basically avoid what is happening now, that for good reasons you have emergence of different national schemes. We want to see that there is a more common approach, whether it's voluntary, mandatory, what is exactly the technical standard. These are the questions that we would have to work together with all stakeholders in a very, I would say, meticulous way, and definitely not too fast, because you cannot afford to get it wrong, and again, to kill innovation, have other type of collateral damage, including for SMEs. Because if you think about SMEs, indeed, one of the issues is the cost is actually making this something that is accessible. So the last thing that I want to mention is actually, it was one of the tweets here from my team. We just actually relaunched or reminded we are running now a survey which is specifically directed to SMEs, which is specifically on what do you think is the right approach on certification. So I think with these quick comments I would finish, and again, thanks a lot for these ideas.
Okay, thank you. Join me, please, in thanking our panel. And if you're all back in the room, I'll begin smartly at 5 to 3, and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you. No, it's some new people, but it's the same conversation.
No, good. I was worried also this 30 minutes, and we started right away from the first question of activities. That's good.
I just didn't think it was time, and I thought if we get can we have that slide up when people come back in? Then I can kick off the second half by. Yeah. Okay. Partly I didn't do it because I'm not working on my phone again. So if I go to the next question. Moderator.
How you shut it.
Shut up, Emily, shut up. It's
European Cybersecurity. So please,
issues with this voting thing, this Menti voting thing.
I managed to vote.
Did you? That's good.
Orange, we have orange as well. So,
What time do we have?
You have 10 minutes.
It's a PPP. So we have the European Commission. We're the private part. On the private part, exactly. So, and we have even a working group under the certification for telecoms. It's led by Orange.
That has shown quite a change from where it was. Let me first draw your attention to the results of that poll we had. What should be the priority for the EU in the field of cybersecurity for the years to come? 24% more cooperation between member states. That was an early front runner and has fallen back. Supporting the EU cybersecurity industry took a little bit of time to get going on that, but 25%. Fighting cybercrime more effectively, 18%, but far out in the lead, raising awareness and developing skills. So that's, I guess, what you all took away from the first panel. There was the second question, if I could see. Yep. Do you think that certification is an appropriate tool to increase EU cyber resilience? Leaving aside the don't knows, yes is 21 and no is only 10. So fairly conclusive results there. Panel 2 now is the Internet of Things, Devices and Cybersecurity, and we're going to look at the energy sector in particular. That was mentioned in the first panel as well. And for this, we have more questions from menti.com, which if you go to your apps again, we have a series of questions for this. The code you will need to put in for this one is 11107. And 3 questions this time. Could the spread of IoT devices connected to any critical infrastructure, like the energy grid, pose additional cybersecurity risks? Second question, is a policy framework ensuring minimal security requirements for IoT devices a starting point to increase IoT security for consumers and smart networks? And thirdly, would you agree with the statement, smart and secure networks have to be the central point for our cybersecurity strategy? Those are 3 yes or no questions, and hopefully it will be illuminating at the end to see how everyone here voted, and of course everyone watching the live streaming. We have now new guests up to talk about this issue, and starting here just to my right, we have Michael Boney from the European Parliament, MEP for the EPP group. Then we have Sylvie Weirthart from ST Microelectronics. Jos Menting next from Energy Laborelec, a cybersecurity company in Belgium. Apostolos Malatras from ENISA, the cybersecurity agency I'm sure we're all familiar with. And at the far end, Agustin Reina from BEOC, which is the consumers organization. So let me start with you, Agustin, since you're furthest away. What did you hear from the first panel that gave you some hope, or what did you hear that maybe felt a little bit negative?
I would say it's a mixed feeling, but the discussion reminded me of a very interesting quote from an FT journalist who said about self-regulation.
Yep, hold it really close.
I was just, as well. I was just mentioning that the discussion previously reminded me a very interesting quote that I read recently on the FT, which says that self-regulation stands in relation to regulation, like self-importance stands in relation to importance. Of course, everybody would agree that their products are the best, and with the different labels, you can also promote and have a competitive advantages over others. But when we look at the discussion around security, it's very similar to the discussion that we had in relation to privacy. Privacy and security should not be granted just because you can afford more expensive products. It's something that should be given by default. When it comes to privacy, we do have legislation in place, the GDPR, but the GDPR means very little if the principles are not integrated in the very early stage of design. Exactly the same happens when it comes to security, with the only caveat that when we look at security issues, the situation is far more unclear. And particularly when we look at the interplay, for example, with the energy sector. If you think of an individual consumer, there was a lot of discussion previously about awareness. A consumer can know very little about the risk, the personal risk that an IoT or connected device can cause to his own environment, let alone to the critical energy infrastructure. Therefore, I think that the previous discussion in relation to liability is fundamental. Of course, people have to be aware, but what is most important is that you have rules in place that make accountable, the different actors in the value chain. Therefore, here we'll need much more, I would say, a holistic approach. And just to close, I think many of you are familiar perhaps with the work of Consumer Association on testing. In the past, consumer associations have been testing the safety of products. And there you have legislation to check against. When you develop your testing protocols, you can look at what are the different standards that have to be respected by everybody that put a product in the European market. When we started discussing now the question of security, for example, the situation it's more challenging, because how you test the security of a product, what do you take against as a reference? And it was this famous case of the infamous Kayla doll, in which one of the questions is that, well, all these flaws that we have identified can be tackled with the current European legislation. We look specifically, for example, at the product safety legislation, and there are diverging rules. It's not clear, because safety is about the physical aspect of the product, not the different virtual elements or digital elements that might be embedded in the product, let alone the interplay between the product with critical infrastructure of the or the networks. So therefore, we really need to look this more from a holistic perspective and see what are the different elements that we can use in the different areas of law, going from privacy to specific legislation like energy. Thank you.
Okay. Apostolos, I mean, I'm sure you agree that security by design is the way forward, but is it enough? Does that go far enough?
Thank you very much, first of all. As you know, yes, security by design and privacy by design are things that ENISA has been advocating for years, because these are the fundamental elements that we need to have for every solution to start talking about security. If these are not in place, and when, at the time that they should be in place, at the design phase, then it's very difficult to come up later and patch things up. I also very much agree to the whole discussion before and actually just now on liability, because the Internet of Things is something, if we ask the people around the room, what do you think the Internet of Things is, they will come up with, I don't know how many we are, as many different answers. So it's not like we're talking about a particular product that if we issue, for example, a standard or a particular certificate that can apply to all products. We're talking about things from smart dolls to smart cars to airplanes to critical infrastructures in the energy. So the solution, and this is another thing that we have been talking about for many years, risk assessment and risk management should be taken into account. So the risks of the particular product and the application scenario should also be reflected in the security solution that we provide. The same security solution might not be ideal for completely two different types of products and two different types of use cases. That's why it is important to have things like liability in place, because it also gives a certain motivation, let's say, to people, to developers, to programmers, to manufacturers themselves to come up with more secure products and also more private products. First of all is this, and secondly, then it gives a certain level of trust. That was another concept that was also mentioned in the first panel that I was extremely interested. Because at the end of the day, the consumers will use the products that they trust, and trust is not something that a particular compliance to a standard will give. It's something that will be given by means of things like certification or labeling even, but this will not come in itself. We don't have a mechanism in place to instantiate these things. This will come as a result of a lot of different aspects in terms of cybersecurity in IoT. And amongst these things, for example, is the direction that we have in the NIS, where we have baseline security requirements for different operators. So what ENISA is working on this year is baseline security requirements for the Internet of Things. And that can be a first step towards liability. For example, if people are not respecting some of these requirements, be them mandatory, be them voluntarily, I'm assuming due to the diversity of the domain, due to the diversity of the ecosystem, voluntary is a better match probably. But this is up to debate with the stakeholders. This is, all these things will lead to a more secure and more trusted Internet of Things that could streamline developments in the area.
Okay. Joss, if you grab a microphone, Joss there. Joss, yeah. I mean, we're talking on a sort of quite a high level and very much in the abstract. Can you give me some sort of practical examples from your viewpoint?
Yes, as an energy provider, we've seen what energy means. Yesterday we had a blackout over here. The lights goes off, and that's the importance of electricity. So that's what we try to establish, to have a kind of reliable production of power. So taking it from there, you start with components, building a system which in the end is a smart grid or a nuclear power plant or everything between here, renewable power, and you try to secure that with devices that you buy from the market. It starts with secure components. If those components are not secure, how can you build a secure system? But then in reality, we do have complete power plants and grids to produce power and to distribute it to the end user. You have to work with that in a safe manner. There's no handbook on the market that you can buy and say, okay, this is how you have to do it. So what we practically did is build an internal framework where we say, okay, this is a smart way to work with operational technology, and how you can or how we have to work with that. So and I know self-assessment is not a good thing, but at least as, let's say, internal independent center of competence, we challenge all the sides, and we say, okay, how do you work with that? And we measure against our own framework. So that's a kind of starter. It's not ideal, but that's where we start, and that's where we are at the moment. It's a long journey, because people have to be aware, and I saw awareness is scoring high. Yeah, internally we call that stupid human behavior, but about 80% of the things that happen, power plants that shut off completely due to a cybersecurity incident, most of the time it's human behavior that kicks in. It's not the component. Of course, we have viruses that can do harm, and things that come through internet, etc. But most of the time we are still at the level of educating people, bringing them up to speed, and giving them the right tools to work with.
Sylvie, do you agree? Is it all user error?
Oh, yes.
This one works.
Okay. There's another one here.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and this will provide me the opportunity to exchange maybe a common cybersecurity position on which we work with ENISA. So
Keep the microphone close.
Many silicon.
A little bit closer.
Okay. Many European silicon manufacturers worked with ENISA, and reach a common agreement on cybersecurity, and propose some actions or strategies or axes of works. In fact, around 4 axes. The first one is around standardization and certification. The second one is secure processes and services. The third one is scalable security implementation. And the last one is financial incentives. So just to clarify the things, I've been in the smart card industry during more than 20 years. So I work in very high security in my world with very complex things and so on. And I moved in another service dealing with general microcontrollers, and I realized that the words that I was using were not understood by the other or misunderstood. So in order to better explain our position, I would like to make some parallel with the day-to-day life that we all know, taking the example, for example, of how we secure the car and the transports, to explain what we mean between these words that I said previously. So first point, we call for a regulatory framework for basic security requirement. Let's take the example of the car. When cars were built, everything that had a wheel could go on a road, and it was okay. Then everybody agree now that a minimum is that a car should have brakes and lights. And this is a minimum security requirement that is commonly agreed. I think that this minimum security requirement should be established also for the things that are connected to the IoT. Stupid example also is a car should be identified. Usually you have a plate on the car and you know who is the car. And it should be the same for the object that is connected on the IoT. So this could be part of the minimum security requirements. Then a car has features that the vendor sells. Some obvious features like the speed of the car, or the pollution emissions, or robustness with crash test. Some of these features can be easily verified, so you can do it by self-assessment. Others, like emission of pollution, require standards on which laboratories check that you are aligned. But there is a list, there is a standard, and there is a check that is behind. Others are more complex, like the crash test. Crash test, you need to make a crash that is not usual, so you need more sophisticated way to validate it. And after having your crash test, with the standard, the test, and the result, the vendor is pleased to be able to put a label and say, well, I have passed this test, and I can sell it, and you can trust it because I have the label that proves that I have passed it. So this is what we call security requirements. The second step is the importance of security processes and services. Whatever the security of the car, you need to be a good driver. You need a driver license, and your attitude on the road is very important. And it's the same for IoT. You need to have a good way to manage to administrate your system, to manage your passwords and things like this. So this is another important axe. And the car that you have also gets older and older, and so you need to recheck the security of your car. And this is absolutely accepted by everybody. And it will be exactly the same for the IoT devices. So you need a security process to continuously evaluate the security of the devices and ensure the consistency of the whole things. The third point is the importance of scalable security implementation. In fact, only the person that is using the device or the components know in which environment he will use it and what are the threats that he has to face. So only this guy will be able to put the right security requirements. And as silicon manufacturer, we are not there to tell him you need to take this one, or this one. We are there to provide the right products that is needed for him. So this highlights the importance of risk management and good identification of the needs. And we are here to provide the right products. And to be sure that we provide the right products, once again, it's important to tell what we put in the products and having what we call a certification that checks that what we have is aligned with what we say that we have. And this is very, very important. And these kinds of certification can be very easy if it's basic. If you have a basic and entry level, you can have very basic certification or self-assessment of your security. If you will get more trust if you have an external evaluation. And if you need more trust again, you can ask certification bodies to make penetration tests, or with a fixed delay of penetration test, or with a very complex penetration test, like what we have in smart card, for examples. So there is not one cost for certification or one cost for security. There is scalable implementation and scalable cost for it that should be adapted to the need that is there. The last point, that is maybe not the easiest one, is the economic aspect of it. What is terrible with security is that the people that have to pay to make the security are not the victims. So usually, you can be very aware that it is nice to make good products and so on. I heard a lady saying it's €3, I think, more to. We are in a business where 1 cent counts. So if there is not an incentive to make the security, people will not do it. So if the victims are not those who have to pay, we need a regulation, or it will never work.
Okay. Michael, you're the one who has to come up with some of the legislation, and we talked a little bit that it is difficult sometimes for politicians to do this when they're not the technical experts. So, I mean, what are the challenges that you're facing?
So I want to continue this challenge related to self-assessment, because I think that this is very important to understand that we need to, it was discussed earlier, we need to raise the awareness of all problems related to cybersecurity as more digital we are using. And I think that it's important to discuss about proper implementation of Network Information Security Directive in Europe, in all member states. It's important to discuss about the new mandate for ENISA for the future and give the ENISA not only tools related to analysis and analytical capacity, but also some executions, because it's important. Yes, I remember some reports prepared by ENISA on energy sector and on hospitals, yes, with some recommendations, and I know that those recommendations are the recommendations in this report. And in many hospitals, for example, all over the Europe, there is no any response to those kind of recommendations. So we need to make it. On the other hand, I think that when we are talking about assessment, it's important also to discuss about some kind of cyber hygiene. Because when we are talking about children, they know that they need to wash hands. So if they know that they need to check logins, they need to be much more careful when they are using internet. It doesn't mean that I only want to talk about children, but I think that we need to start also in curricula to raise the awareness of all problems related to cybersecurity, because this is some kind of co-responsibility, co-liability related to cybersecurity. It's the work for governments, it's the work for ENISA, it's the work for European Union and some legislative framework, it's the work for companies to prepare risk assessment. Without risk assessment, there is no possibility to have good responses. But also, we need to consider how small business should be involved to make risk assessments. Because it is not only for the big companies, for infrastructure, for power plants, yes? It's important for any business, yes? So risk assessment is one of the key issues, and management of the risk, and after that probably we need to consider some kind of insurances also in Europe related to that area. In the future, yes, but we need to start it. And the final point is that as you have mentioned and you have also expressed it, we need to have standards and certifications and the model how to certificate some new solutions and security by design. It means we need to involve European security, cybersecurity business to the work, how we can prepare in Europe those products, those solutions which will be the response on the need of security by design. So briefly speaking, there are some responsibilities for all institutions, also for all of us as individuals. Yes, without those responsibilities, there is no possibility to go forward and to better understand those issues. And of course, I fully agree that when we are talking about privacy, at the same time, we need to talk about security. There are the two faces of the same coin, yes, because security and privacy, those two issues, those two solutions can create the trust in the digital world, and trust is fundamental for the digital development.
Okay, well, I very much like this word co-responsibility, so I want to sort of interrogate that a little bit more, because we're talking a little bit more in this panel about critical infrastructure and energy and so on. which means it's networked. So there then could be gaps. So who owns the network? I mean, who actually takes responsibility in the end between all these devices? Joss, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, that's something we really faces at the moment, where we formerly had centralized production, power plant feeds into the grid, nicely fenced, etc. So nicely sanitized, let's say, from cyber attacks, where you now see that there are more and more interconnections. If we look to renewable power, that often has direct contact with the internet, so it's much more vulnerable. And there's a kind of hybridization ongoing, where formerly you had your own property nicely controlled, etc., and suddenly you make use of the internet and all the things that are interconnected. Market values that come into smart systems. Everybody has a feed into your system suddenly, and you have to have a good view on what are your connections and how is that intellect, and that's really a topic that's very fastly at a fast speed coming towards us, and very difficult to manage. So that world is changing very fast, and we don't have the solution. I think, and that's already, I think, a couple of times raised, it's a shared responsibility. You can't just put it on the plate of the vendor and say, okay, you have to supply a safe product, and then all is settled. I don't think so, because we as end user build systems, and if you use your car in the wrong way, if you drive on the wrong side of the road, you can have a very safe car, but in the end you will face some problems. So by it starts with the use of safe and secure products, but you also have to build safe and secure systems, and then also you have to operate those systems in a secure way. So there's a whole chain of different things. Making use of your own systems or operated systems that you operate yourself, in combination with systems that, let's say, have a totally different responsibility, makes that we have to remap the whole thing. I think in the end we will end up with things that relate to, let's say, the community and the common things like internet and regulations of that. Share and have another part that really focuses on more the operational technology that is then, let's say, moving the things and taking care of non-digital movements.
Apostolic, you want to do it?
It's true. I completely agree with what you just said. Basically, and we have been working a lot with different stakeholders, in particular in the energy sector, for many years now, doing work on smart grids and energy later on. And what we studied last year is the focus of what is happening now, the network interdependencies in terms of smart grid and energy. And we're actually astonished ourselves to see how complex, how big is the landscape there, how complicated the interconnections between the different stakeholders in the energy sectors are. And this raises significant challenges that need to be addressed. Main thing that I agree that you mentioned as well, it's a very big supply chain. So there are many people, many actors playing roles there. So I don't know, if we came up with a security solution, would it need to be applied to all of them at the same time and the same manner, or should be adapted a bit to reflect the needs of the different sectors as well? These are some questions that are open to debate, of course, and that's why maybe a fixed approach, fix-it-all panacea solution might not be ideal for such an interconnected and complex and also evolving environment. Imagine the fact that smart meters are going in have to be in place in all apartments, in all houses in Europe. That exposes even more Internet of Things oriented risks in the energy sector. And of course, baseline requirements are needed for this thing, but when you have such a complex landscape with actors involved, liability again comes as a natural solution, I think, to motivate people to behave, let's say, in a more secure manner when it comes to such interconnected things.
Augustine, yeah.
Of course, I share Hello? Yeah. Of course, I share the point of view that there is a shared responsibility, you know. But nevertheless, I think that if we just focus on the network security, then we're missing the point. The devices that actually people use, you know, is the entry point at the end of the day to make the networks vulnerable. And of course, I agree that the people need to know how to handle, you know, their devices. But this does not prevent that you have to create an incentive, you know, for companies, and linked to what you said before, to develop more secure products, you know. And that incentive, a big part of that incentive comes with having clear liability rules. And we go back again to that initial discussion. For example, if we look at product safety or the product liability, you know, we have a specific legislation in place. So if you put a product in the European market, you know, you are liable for any physical injury, you know, that you cause to a user or their goods or assets. But of course, it does not include the eventual risks that are associated with security breaches, for example. You know? So again, the fact that, as I said, awareness, you know, is important. People need to know how to use their devices, you know, but the way should put on the shoulders of those that are putting the products in the markets, you know. And the biggest incentive for them to do a good job is to know that if there is something going wrong, then they will have the enforcers going after them.
So maybe I would just like to make a small comment on the segmentation of security per activity, because in fact all these devices at the end will be interconnected, and it's important to highlight that basic requirements are common to all sectors. Things as basic as saying that each device should have an identity and be capable to authenticate itself. Because if you don't know to who you are speaking, you will never be able to provide trust. So this is a very basic requirement. Just agree on the identity of the devices and how to be sure the device that you address is the one that it pretends to be, so how you authenticate the device. This is, for example, a basic security that is valid for all sectors.
Yeah, I agree, but you know, when we are talking about some new challenges, 5G infrastructure in the future, now due to the capacities of current infrastructures, we have the possibility to join at 1 square kilometer just about 1,000 devices. And we will have the possibility, due to 5G, to connect at the 1 square kilometer 1 million devices. So this is a challenge, yes? And probably we need to put some questions in the new way. Consider how it will look like in the future, not now. And of course, it will be clear that, that security by design will be one of the most important solutions, yes? And on the other hand, the question which was put also for us, if we will have connections between smart grids, between power plants and Internet of Things, in many devices will be connected. So how we will be able to create the security of the essential functions of the energy system? In some countries, there is a discussion that in some areas as energy, for example, it should be out of the common internet. It should have the special circles, yes, for security. I have no answer to those questions, yes, but I think that we need to put those questions thinking about these consequences of 5G infrastructure implementation and the new era also for security issues. And also with keeping this co-sharing and sharing responsibility, but understanding how all changes, how all devices and all situation will be changed in the new situation.
Okay.
Just a quick note. I fully agree, and I'm really happy that you brought up 5G because it's yet another example of integration and interplay between networks, software, hardware. So similar to what we've seen in other sectors, and it's a perfect scenario for IoT devices, and that's why it will be like for automotive and healthcare devices. So the security risks that will come into play, and the security requirements are things that need to be addressed now. So I really second what Sylvie mentioned before about baseline requirements being the way forward, be that mandatory or voluntary, it's debatable and probably application specific, application sector specific, but baseline requirements are a way that I think that stakeholders need to sit down around the table, and ESA can facilitate that, and that's what we're working on this year. I'm self-promoting ourselves now on baseline requirements for the Internet of Things.
Okay, have we any questions here from the room? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Guido Lobarano. I work with Business Europe, the Confederation of European Enterprises. I'm interested in the discussion on liability. There's a lot of talk about the liability related to the product or whatever the service, but there was a discussion about the importance of the use and how the users actually might have a huge impact on cybersecurity. So it's just an open question to all panelists, how should we deal with potential liability for users doing something wrong?
Well, of course, we can't tell users how to use devices. Manufacturers can't mandate that. Augustine, do you want to tackle that? I mean, there's an increasing trend towards sort of sealed box devices that users actually,
Yeah, no, the fact is, of course, consumers need to be aware how to use their devices. And if you have by default the right settings, that, for example, they will be needed to be bypassed in order to make the product vulnerable. That would be a type of liability that would apply in any case about how to use any type of product, irrespective of whether it is connected or not. What is important is that in the liability discussion, we don't put the weight on the user as such, but we follow the same approach that we have so far in EU law across sectors, is that you make sure that your products are in the market are safe, and that is the starting point then for the users to assess whether there is negligence or not in the ways that are being used. But the first step is to ensure that the product that is on the market is safe and meet minimum standards. We have it for chemicals, we have it on food safety, we have it on data protection, we don't have it for cybersecurity.
Michael.
But if I know in the United States there is a custom that companies are sharing information on all incidents related to cybercrime and cyber threats, without any concrete information about what they have lost or something like that, because this is a secret of their market position. But they are sharing how the attack looks like. And I think that this is important. If I properly know, ENISA has some kind of 10% of all information about all incidents, yes, because we have this custom, this habit to share with the world on all of those incidents. It is important, and we need to have also promotion, because from what consumer could know that something new forms of attacks is growing up. Yeah? So I think that we need, when we are serious considering how to make the cybersecurity stronger in the European Union, so we need to have some platforms for consumers with practical information, yes, what they can do, what they need to do. Probably it's too ideal, yes, but on the other hand, I think that we need to make it, yes. And not only to say that, okay, we need to have security by design, or that we need to make responsible states and so on and so on. Because as a member of European Parliament, I feel that the authorities in the European Parliament are not informing me as user of the network, European Parliament network, about some new threats. Yes, I think that I have to be informed about those issues. So this is a question how we can, because when we are talking about raise the awareness of the problem, we are all agree. But on the other hand, how to make it, yes, in the practical way.
Very briefly on the point, can I?
Okay, and then we'll come to Joss.
Of course, that people need to be aware, but as new threats appear, is when it comes also the responsibility, you know, to update your products and to prevent that these new threats, you know, affect the awareness. With awareness as well, but we cannot start with the assumption that people should, you know, or they will check, you know, any type of or have the preconception that they will necessarily be informed about these threats, you know. When the starting point should be that it's the responsibility of those that are putting in the market that they update, you know, their products in a way that can address those potential threats.
Sorry, sir. You cannot, no, because we are live streaming and they can't hear you.
Because you clearly don't know.
You please, sir. We can't hear you on the video and you're just shouting in a room. So please let the panelists speak. No, sorry, sir. No. Do. Please continue. Please continue.
Which one?
Me, he's not happy with me. Please. This is being live streamed. You cannot speak without a microphone. Continue, please. Come on, Joss, please. Please, can you, Joss? Sir, I will ask for people to ask you to leave the room. I have never had to do this in many years of moderating. Please be quiet. Sorry, Joss.
I would like to make a remark on, let's say, being informed of upcoming threats. Another thing that I still have to work on is incidents and incident reporting and discussing about incidents that happen, because that will learn us a lot of vulnerabilities that really are exploited. We do have such a platform. It's now in the hands of ENISA, I think, the CEO Scutzi, but that needs to be revived, and that's a kind of, let's say, sharing information between governmental bodies and European Commission and end users and the community, and I think that helps to, let's say, understand the real problems that really occur and that really does harm to the environment. So I think that's also something we should think of, not only from the things that are coming towards us, but also learn from the real incidents that happen and very often stay under the radar. We do have power plants that really shut down to issues, and we really should learn and share that information so that others also can make use of that.
Just a remark for the security of components. Industries and national agencies have regular meetings and association and discuss and share all the incidents. And when a product is common criteria certified for the highest level of security, not for the basic light bulb, but for your smart card, for your payment card, or for your passport, if a major incident occurs, all silicon manufacturers have to repass a recertification or update their products to counter this new vulnerability. So the system is in place, but for very high security requirements. It should be downgraded and make more exploitable for lower security level. So we cannot say that there is no sharing of information, it is done, but maybe not implemented for the lowest level.
Okay,
just to, I fully agree. This information sharing, instant reporting is something really important and can raise awareness both on the public but also on the people involved that need to fix things, because if something happens in one company, it might happen in another company, and thus it will help. That's why it's an excellent example, the NIS directive nowadays, that will actually is a very nice first step in this direction.
Okay. But this is a very good direction, but when we are looking at the implementation, so we have many problems. Yes, till to the time in which we will treat cybersecurity as a security in the conventional understanding, which is in the treaty, that this is responsibility of the member states. So we will not be able to solve the problem, because cybersecurity is over borders. Yes, it's not related to the borders. It's not related to the state responsibility for the security. This is completely new. And when we are talking about new mandate for ENISA, we need to use the word, the meaning, the expression of cybersecurity in the new way, and to convince member states to be much more open for stronger cooperation, because we feel the lack of this cooperation. This is a real problem in Europe.
Okay, so any more questions from the floor? Does the gentleman with the loud voice want to ask a question with the microphone?
No, I was just going to help. Wait, please. I sit on a couple of UK senior cyber groups, and I also chair the New Zealand company, which runs the cyber centre in New Zealand. And of course, what I was trying to endorse here was that New Zealand in particular, followed by Scotland and then UK, have set up these centres which do precisely what you have described here, which is collate data which is useful to other people, and do what both of you referred to, which is learn from lessons from it, and particularly what Sylvia said, which is apply some common sense, which hasn't been actually discussed. So there are places around the world, there's others as well, Rwanda's actually quite a good example, where this correlation of data on a practical basis is already established, and it might be something the EU might want to have a look at. Very happy to give you some contacts to help you. Okay?
Okay, and there was another question.
On the other hand, it's a pity that United Kingdom decided to go out.
Just watch the space. Speaking as a New Zealander.
Just maybe another word.
Yep.
Even if we are competitors, usually European silicon manufacturers work together, and also industrial. We have very good collaboration with our German colleagues. So the door is not so close, but it's on individual initiatives, and it could be good to extend it to a real European initiative.
Okay. Yeah.
My name is Geert Mariels. I'm a member of the Flemish Privacy Commission. You talked mainly about IoT and external dangers, threats. But you shouldn't forget there's a lot of concern with citizens about what are the companies going to do with my data. You know too much about me just from the wearables, the things in my car, and so on. And if you say you want to identify the tools, that opens the risk that one way or the other, the tools are going to be linked to the owner, and then next thing, privacy threat is linking everything, all these devices, to know too much more about me than my mother does. So is this part of the scope of cybersecurity? And if so, what are you doing about it, except for the general privacy rules, which are mainly not important at all? I mean, you still do what you want, unless until I complain.
Well, let me add to that as well the question of certain governments of, hoarding exploits and vulnerabilities to sort of, which creates an inherently vulnerable ecosystem because they want to be able to exploit them at a later date. Backdoors into encryption. So Agustin, you were going to answer, yeah.
That's actually also a very good reflection, and I like what MEP Boni said at the beginning. That's the idea that there are these two sides of the same coin. Of course, that are related. If your devices, become vulnerable from a safety or security point of view, there's also a risk that your data may be leaked. But on your specific point, and I am a little bit more optimistic than you on the GDPR, especially because we have not yet entered into force, so we have to give it a chance first. But I think that it's very, very important to start looking at the incorporation of the GDPR principles like the security principles that we should have, and this the missing part, into the early design of the product. So something that we're doing as consumer associations, starting to look at all these products. So then when we, for example, make our testing protocols, we have something to check against. So if we have the GDPR, then we see, okay, whether these products respect the different principles. Is the data they're collecting necessary just for the performance or to provide the service, or they're going beyond that, therefore amounting to an infringement of the GDPR. But we don't have the same situation when it comes to the cybersecurity, to the security of the products as such. Therefore, I think there are the two things that should be seen hand by hand. And the day that we have cybersecurity principles in place, which become mandatory, they should be, of course, aligned with what we have in the data protection field.
Apostolos, do you want to add the question? Yeah, the question I think was from the gentleman, does this constitute cybersecurity? In your mind, is this part of...
Definitely. Privacy is a very important aspect of the cybersecurity landscape. And as mentioned by Agustin before, the GDPR is, in my opinion at least, a very, very, very important legislative framework that covers many, many aspects and that have a direct impact on the Internet of Things, the notion of consent, the notion of data portability that is being handled now by the GDPR and that was not there before. These are important things that will help reinforce the notion of privacy in this highly connected world. So let's wait for the implementation in the coming year, and let's be optimistic at least for that.
Just make a comment, because for me, these are not the two parts of the coin. For me, security is the basement, and on the security, you build the privacy. Because if you don't have security, you will never be able to ensure the privacy.
Okay. Lady here at the back.
Hi, my name is Danielle Cruz. I'm with the cybersecurity company Palo Alto Networks. And I like Mr. Boni's kind of looking at the whole range of aspects that have to be taken into account for cybersecurity risk management and awareness and security by design. And it's a multifaceted issue. I guess my question is, I've heard a lot of talk in Europe in the last few years about more cyber threat information sharing. So not so much about incidents per se, but the threats. Like the threats are changing every minute. The criminals are inventing new ways to attack. And we're all in this together against the cyber criminals. And the more we share the threat information among each other, the more we can do to prevent these attacks from being successful. And sometimes it's something that a consumer or an individual might be able to do something about, but sometimes it's very sophisticated and really the IT people or your technology has to react to it. But as you update the cybersecurity strategy and you look at activities in the parliament, I'm wondering what the plans are to try and promote more cyber threat information sharing within Europe.
Yeah, Apostolos, you who wants to take it first? One of you. Yeah, Sylvie. Okay.
Yes, of course it's important to share, but the difficulty is not to share or not, because if you go to the site of national agencies, you will see almost all the attacks online and all the warnings. The problem is you need to manage it. And the real difficulty is there. It's not, because these are, all the vulnerabilities usually are published by national authorities. You can go to the site and you see it. So it's more how you can react effectively than being really aware, because the technical data are there.
Well, Apostolos, let me ask you, because I know ANISA does every year this cyber attack day, and it seems to me that the findings every year seem to be, we need to work more collaboratively.
Actually, it was just published today, the incident reporting about the telco sector, and malware was on the top of the list for last year. Yes, NISA is handling the incident reporting, so things that are being reported in it's the secretariat, let's base it. It's handling the reporting in terms of the Article 13A for the telcos, the telecommunication companies for now, and they have to, there is mandatory reporting for them in terms of incidents, and in the context of the NIS that will come into play in 2018, the instant notification will involve other operators of essential services, so we'll probably have more on that. Now, as regards to the to the sharing, sharing of threats. For now, it is not mandated. Let's say. Is it something interesting? Yes, it could potentially help, I think. As you mentioned before, it is also the most important thing, how to handle these threats. So, yes, to report them, and I'm guessing, as you said before, at the national level, more or less it is happening in some places. So the management of it in a more harmonized, homogeneous manner is something to be considered. Yeah.
Well, finally, I've got a last question to you, Michael. We've heard about, collaboration. What do you think, as a policy background, to bring it back to, what we wanted to talk about, what should be the future focus for you in the Parliament, the Commission, and those, proposing legislation?
I think that there are some issues. Firstly, we need to finish the implementation of Network Information Security Directive and to push our colleagues from member states, especially from some member states, to finish the work on it. Secondly, we need to work on this new cyber security strategy, and I think that we need to understand many dimensions of this cyber security strategy. Cybercrime, cyber threats related to hacking, attacking, and so on. And also I think that we need to discuss what kind of common tools, common instruments at the European level we will be able to have. And third point is related to the new mandate for ENISA. As I have mentioned earlier, my opinion is that ENISA should have some executive powers in soft understanding, yes, but it should be stronger than it is now, yes, because there are some deficits, if I can describe the situation. And fourth point is related to how we in the European Union can make the awareness of all those problems much more visible for our citizens. Because on the other hand, we need to remember about the economic aspects of this. Year per year, we are losing globally just about 450 and more billions of US dollars in the area of cybercrime, in many, many areas, yes? So if I can compare, I would say that the assistance from developed countries to developing countries is at the level 130 billion US dollars. So this is 1/3. So we are losing money. We are losing money as a global economy, having not proper answers. Of course, I'm not naive. So I don't want to say that, okay, we will have some tools and everything will be okay. We will have some tools and mafia and crime organizations will have new tools. But we need to work much stronger together, and we need to have much clear responses to those issues. And on the other hand, I think that we don't need to be counterproductive. When I'm looking at the Article 11 in e-privacy regulation, we are talking about e-privacy, harmonization of rules, and so on. And in this article proposed by the Commission is something which will remove the solution from the European level to member states. And when I'm talking with people who are implementing end-to-end encryption, for example, they are full of concerns because it will give to the member states the possibility to change some rules and to find this back door to encryption, for example, without any clear justification. Yes. So I think that we need to be consistent when we are talking about privacy and security, and I fully agree that probably security is the basis. But when I'm looking at the political debates, very often we are talking, and many politicians are speaking and saying that, okay, security is much more important than privacy, so take all your data and so on and so on. I'm from Poland, yes, and the new ruling party from 2015 decided to have the access to all information in the networks, in the internet, on me, on individual people, and this is unbelievable. Yes, full access, yes. When I have talked with my colleagues from United States, they have said to me that, okay, they hadn't this possibility during 15 last years any time. So we need to be careful thinking about considering issues related to privacy and security. And when we are talking about security in this dimension, as you mentioned, okay, I fully agree, this is the background, yes, but security have two meanings, yes, and very often it's using as a tool in the political debates.
Okay, well, before we disappear down a privacy rabbit hole, which we could spend another 3 hours discussing, I'm going to ask one question to the panel, and I just want kind of a quick yes or no answer, and that's, so in terms of solutions, so should something like IoT labeling be part of the certification toolbox? Do you see that as a useful tool, yes or no?
Well, don't misunderstand what a label means. You will never find a label that will tell you, yes, this is secure and it will be secure for 10 years. For me, the label is only if you start with the label, you start from the wrong place. Okay. You should start from the requirement, the standard, the evaluation or certification, and then you arrive to the label. Going in this direction, it makes sense.
Okay.
In the opposite direction, it's nonsense.
Just labeling, yes or no, or do you agree?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was discussed well, and it was also mentioned in the previous panel. That sticker, that decal on the product is just a kind of proof that you did a kind of process. And if that's the label, fine for me.
Agustin, isn't it useful for consumers, for example?
Maybe.
Okay.
There is no yes and no. It depends the conditions, the framing, the enforcement, and what is the basis for that label.
Okay.
And just taking the NCAP, the robust, the crash test. Even if you have a label with a 5-star crash test, there'll still be accidents. But when you buy your car, you have enabled enough trust to go with your car somewhere.
But I want to support what you have said about the process from the very beginning to labeling. Yes, it's key solution because it's also related to this risk analysis, risk assessment. Yes, and this is very needed. We have voted 3 days ago in the European Parliament energy efficiency labeling framework. Yes. And it's going on. It's developing. Yes, with the information, there will be new platforms for consumers with all information. So I think that this labeling model is very good, but not label as label, but after those processes, as you mentioned.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there because it is 4 o'clock. If we could get the slide up to see how you all voted, or those who are watching online voted on our 3 questions. Okay, so do you think that certification is an appropriate tool to increase cyber resilience? That's strongly in favor, yes. 2 don't knows, okay. That's Agustin's on that. Maybe. Maybe, perhaps. If we can get the next one. Okay. No, this was from the first panel. But actually, I see that during this last few minutes, it has changed, even while we were discussing. And I can hear arguing back here where they're trying to find me the next slide. Okay, while we're waiting for that, please join me in thanking our panel here, and thank you all for being so attentive. Okay. Maybe we will see it, maybe we won't, but you can always look it up online. That's at menti.com.
Feel secure.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
I think it was
fun.
Thanks. It was very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you for your step by step. I love that.
Yes.